we're in West Cornwall. We're just outside Pendeen, and we're on an area of moorland which is called One Gumpus. I'm standing in front of Porphyro's grave, and it's a Bronze Age burial mound, and the Bronze Age is about 4,000 years ago here in West Cornwall, and it would have been quite an extensive barrow. I'm actually stood in front of the curbstones here, and the barrow itself would have been a mound behind me. It was excavated, and when it was excavated by William Copeland Borlase in the Victorian period, he opened up the mound completely, and then he found a kist in the middle, a kist feature, which is some stones, and within that kist feature he found a rock which has cup mark features on. Now unfortunately that rock is now missing. So burial mounds would have been community burial mounds. There would have been a number of people from the local community, most likely cremated. Occasionally they were buried as their skeletons as well within them, but most of them were cremated remains that have been found in these places. So we're stood in front of Tregeseal Stone Circle on Truthwell Common. So we're just outside of St Just, and we're on an open area of moorland which has an extensive amount of Bronze Age remains. So we're talking about 4,000 years ago. So up the hill there is the suggestion that there are some Bronze Age hut circles, and that they would have farmed down the hillside, and they would have had this stone circle at the bottom. Now the stone circle itself, Tregeseal, is also called Tregeseal East Stone Circle, this one, and that's because it was part of a pair. There was also Tregeseal West, which was in the field behind us. Running up the hill is an ancient pathway called the Tinner's Way, which you can actually walk from St Just all the way to St Ives, and that dates way back into prehistory as well. So the current thinking is that there was just a pair of stone circles, Tregeseal East and the removed Tregeseal West, and that's quite common. There are lots of pairings of stone circles down here. So the Merry Maidens also has a stone circle next to it, in the field next to it, and also at Nine Maidens there is the Men and Toll. So pairings of stone circles aren't particularly unusual here in West Cornwall. The Tregeseal Stone Circle is heavily restored, so currently there are 19 stones in the circle itself, but there is the possibility that there would have been slightly more or less than that in the original circle, and we obviously don't know how many stones were in the western stone circle, which was on the other side of the hedge. So stone circles have had a long history with solar alignments. The Stonehenge with the hill stone alignment on the summer solstice sunrise to the winter solstice sunset, that's been known about for about 400 years. And it's interesting when you look at some of the stone circles here in West Cornwall, this one has solar alignments. So Tregeseal in particular has been positioned with the winter solstice in mind, and the two circles themselves, the Tregeseal East and Tregeseal West, would have had an open sky, open run on the landscape behind us, and within that you can see a small gap which is framed the sea, and on the sea itself is the Isles of Scilly, and it's on the Isles of Scilly that the winter solstice sunset would have set, right in the middle in the Bronze Age. So we have the feeling that these two circles were positioned here so people could come down on the winter solstice and see this sun set over the Isles of Scilly itself. The other suggestion with the solar cycle is to do with the 19 stones in the stone circle itself. And the number 19 is interesting astronomically because it's the first time that the solar cycle actually meets the lunar phase cycle. So if we were to take the lunar phase cycle, we're talking from a full moon all the way to new moon back to full moon. And the solar cycle, I'm talking a year, so I'm talking from the summer solstice all the way through the solar cycle back to the next summer solstice. If you were to come here on a summer solstice and there'll be a full moon, it would take 19 years for you to come back here on the summer solstice and there to be a full moon. So it is suggested that perhaps the people that built these things knew about this cycle, which is called the Metonic cycle. The final thing I should really mention to do with the solar cycle down here is the Barrows and the stone row up the hill. If you were to come here on the summer solstice sunrise, you would see the sun rise over the Barrows and the stone row off towards the northeast of the site here. So we're here next to a stone row. The stone row over here is quite unique. If I wander over to it, we can have a look. So I'm standing here at the first stone in what is a stone row, and we have 3 standing stones in this direction and 1 which is recumbent laying in the ground. So there would have been 4 stones in the row. There is also an outlier which has been moved off to the side. As you'll see, the stones themselves are quite unique because they've all got a hole within them. It's quite difficult to date when this stone row would have been put here, but it is thought that it is a Bronze Age stone row, so about 4,000 years old, and it is felt that the holes themselves would have been put in at the same time. Now, what is really unusual about this stone row is that each of these stones are orientated in a slightly different direction, and it is quite short. So stone rows are quite unique here in West Cornwall because there is only this one and there's one at Zena, whereas there are far more stone rows over on Bodmin Moor or on Dartmoor, which tend to be a lot longer and run for a lot further distance. This stone row, as you see, is quite short and it heads off in that direction towards the Barrow. So I'm stood here by the second stone in the stone row, and this stone is very typical of all the other stones. As you can see, it's got this hole in which all of the stones have. Now these holes are fantastic. They're quite circular when you get down to them. It's quite unusual because this rock is made of granite, so it's very hard, and they wouldn't have had the metal tools to put a hole into a piece of granite very easy. So they would have probably had to use another piece of granite and rub granite on granite until they actually worked their way through and created this hole, which would have taken a significant amount of man hours or hours of time for them to create these holes. So it was something that was done with care and with time. The holes themselves have intrigued me for a while as an astronomer, and I was trying to think of ways that they may have been used if they could have been used in an astronomical way. And one way that I liked is the idea that the sun rises over there on the southeastern horizon, and as it rises, as you're coming towards the winter solstice, it would move, and gradually you would get the sun shining through the hole itself, and as the sun shines through the hole there would be a shadow of the rock behind, and it would make a nice circular light shining through that hole onto the ground below. Now each of the stones are orientated slightly differently, so it would shine on different dates through that hole, and so this stone would start illuminating up in about October time, and the sun would shine through that hole for about 30 days. The stone on the end seems to do around November, and the first stone that we were stood at seems to start illuminating up just before the winter solstice. And so what I think we have here is a countdown calendar which leads us to the winter solstice. I've moved up the hillside from the stone row where we could see Carn Kennett in the background, and I'm now stood in front of this feature. It is a completely natural rocky outcrop made from granite, and it's quite a distinctive feature here in the west part of Cornwall, and you can perhaps understand why people decided to settle, farm and have their ritual landscape around it, because it makes a very interesting landscape area in itself. What is interesting about it is there is perhaps a small addition. There's a prop stone behind me here, and the prop stone looks like almost a fish shape, and it's been added later and propped up on two smaller stones. Now this prop stone has a connection to the winter solstice in that if you're stood at Tune Coit, which is a Neolithic monument in that direction, on the winter solstice you would see the winter solstice set over Carn Kennett next to the propped stone itself. In addition to all the other winter solstice features in the landscape, makes a very interesting story about how people were feeling about the solar cycle, particularly around the winter solstice itself, and suggests that people were congregating here on this moorside to celebrate this festival within their lives.